Anaga's school trip, there were questions and ideas. This was the first time Anaga was going on a school trip, and they boarded the train from Pune in Maharashtra late at night to go all the way to Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh, Banaras. So her mother, who came to see her off at the station, told the teacher, "Do tell the children about the Buddha and take them to see Sarnath as well, so that the ideas, the questions, they can understand and they can ask." So the story of Buddha, Siddhartha or Siddharth, or we know him as Gautam or Gautama, the founder of Buddhism, was born about 2500 years ago. So this was a time of rapid change in the lives of people. So we saw that some kings in the Mahajanpads were growing more powerful. New cities were developing, life was changing in the villages as well. So many thinkers were trying to understand these changes in the society. And they also wanted to try and find out the true meaning of life. So the Buddha belonged to small Gana known as Shakya Gana and was a Kshatriya. When he was a young man, he left the comforts of his home in search of knowledge. He wanted to gain knowledge. He wandered for several years, meeting and holding discussions with other thinkers. So he finally decided to find his own path to realization and meditated for days on end under the peepal tree at Bodh Gaya in Bihar, where he attained the enlightenment, means something new from the Almighty. So after that, he was known as Buddha, or the wise one, the intelligent one, the understanding one. He then went to Sarnath near Banaras, where he taught for the first time. He spent the rest of his life traveling on foot, going from place to place, teaching people, till he passed away at Kushinara. Buddha taught the life. He taught people that the life is full of suffering and unhappiness. This is caused because we have cravings and desires. We want physical things. We want comfort, which often cannot be fulfilled. So sometimes, even if we get what we want and we are not satisfied, we want even more. The wealthiest person on this earth needs more money to remain the wealthiest one. So the Buddha described this as thirst or tanha. He taught that this constant craving could be removed by following moderation in everything. See, he also taught people to be kind and to be respectful to lives of others, including animals. And he believed that the results of our action, called the karma or karma, whether it is good or bad, affect us both in life and the next life if it is there. So Buddha taught in the language of ordinary people, Prakrit, so that everyone could understand his message. And he also encouraged people to think for themselves rather than to simply accept what he said. So let us see how he did this. Before that, let me show you, this is a stupa at Sarnath. The building known as the stupa was built to mark the place where the Buddha first taught his message, first gave his enlightened information. So this is the stupa. The story of Kisago Tami. So he is a famous story from Buddha. This is a famous story about Buddha. Once there was a woman known Kisago Tami, whose son had died. She was so sad that she roamed around the street in the city carrying the child with her, asking for help to bring him back to life. A kind man took her to the Buddha. the Buddha said, "Bring me a handful of mustard seeds, and I will bring your child back to life." Now, Kisa Gotami were overjoyed and started off at once, but the Buddha gently stopped her and added, the seeds he wanted, mustard seed, must come from the house of a family where nobody has died. Now, Kisa Gotami went from door to door, but whenever she went, she found out that someone or the other, father, mother, sister, brother, husband, wife, child, uncle, aunt, grandfather, grandmother, someone has died. So this is the teaching, and though the mother was in sorrow, and one should be, because death of a child is really very uh, sorrow feeling, and a mother can understand that how hurtful it is. But still, she understood what he meant. Upanishads, around the time that Buddha was preaching, and perhaps a little earlier, other thinkers also tried to find answers to difficult questions. Some of them wanted to know about life after death, others wanted to know why sacrifices should be performed. And many of these thinkers felt that there was something permanent in the universe that would last even after death. And they describe this as Atma, or Atman, or the soul, individual soul, and the Brahman, or the universal soul, Brahman. It's Brahman actually. So they believe that ultimately both Atma and Brahman were one. So many of their ideas were recorded in the Upanishads. So these were the part of later Vedic texts. Upanishads literally mean approaching and sitting near. And text contain conversation between the teacher and student. Often ideas were presented through simple dialogues. So here is a dialogue which is based on the story from one of the most famous Upanishad. This is the Upanishad Chandogya Upanishad. So Shaunaka and Abhipratini were two sages who worshipped the universal soul. Now Shaunaka and Abhipratarin, once they sat down to eat, and a beggar came and asked for some food. "We cannot spare anything for you," Shaunaka said. Then the beggar asked, "Learned sirs, whom do you worship?" Now Abhipratin replied, "The universal soul." It means that you know that the universal soul fills the entire world. The sages nodded, yes, we know that. So if the universal soul fills the whole world, it fills me too. Who am I? What a part of the world? The beggar asked. "You speak the truth, O young Brahmin. Then, O sages, by not giving me food, you are actually denying food to your universal soul." And Shaunaka and Abhipratin, they realized the truth of what the beggar said and shared their food with him. So most Upanishadic thinkers were men, especially Brahmins and Rajas. Occasionally there is mention of women thinkers like Gargi, who was famous for her learning and participated in debates held in royal courts. So poor people rarely took part in these discussions. One famous exception was Jabala, Satyakama Jabala, who was named after his mother, the slave woman Jabali. So he had a deep desire to learn about reality, was accepted as a student, a Brahmin teacher named Gautam, and became one of the best known thinkers of that time. So many of the ideas of the Upanishad were later developed by famous thinker Shankaracharya. We'll be talking about him later. Panini, the grammarian. This was also the time when other scholars were at work, not only the religious thinkers or the thinkers about the life. One of the most famous was Panini, who prepared a grammar for Sanskrit. He arranged the vowels and consonants in a special order and then used these to create formula like those found in algebra. And he used these to write down the rules of the language in short formula, around 3,000 of them. Jainism. The most famous thinker of Jainas, Mahavira, Vardhaman Mahavir, also spread his message around this time 2500 years ago. He was a Kshatriya prince of Lichavis. We call it as Lichavi, a group that was a part of Vaji Sangha. At the age of 30, he left home and went to live in forest. For 12 years, he led a hard and lonely life, at the end of which he attained the enlightenment. He taught a simple doctrine: men and women who wish to know the truth must leave their home. They must follow very strictly the rules of ahimsa, which means not hurting or killing anyone, living beings. All beings, said Mahavir, long to live. So, to all things, life is dear. Ordinary people could understand the teachings of Mahavir and his followers because they used Prakrit. There were several forms of Prakrit, means the language, which is understood by the normal people there, or ordinary people. They used to speak the same language used in different parts of the country and named after the regions in which they were used. For example, the Prakrit spoken in Magad was known as Magadhi. So followers of Mahavir, who were known as Jain, had to live very simple lives begging for food. So they had to be absolutely honest and were especially asked not to steal. And also they had to observe celibacy, and men had to give up everything, including their clothes. It was very difficult for men and women to follow these strict rules. Nevertheless, thousands left their homes to learn and teach this new way of life. Many more remained behind and supported those who became monks and nuns and providing them with food. So Jainism was supported mainly by the traders, farmers, who had to kill insects to protect their crops and found it more difficult to follow the rules. Over hundreds of years, Jainism spread to different parts of North India and Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. The teachings of Mahavira and his followers were transmitted orally for several centuries, and they were written down in the form of which they are presently available at a place called Vallabhi in Gujarat about 1500 years ago. So Jain, or the word Jain, comes from the term Jina, meaning conqueror, right? So why do you think the term Jina was used for Mahavir? The Sangh, both the Mahavir and Buddha, they felt that only those who left their home could gain true knowledge. Sitting in home, living the worldly life will not be giving them any purpose. So they arranged for them to stay together in the Sangh, an association of those who left their homes. So the rules made for the Buddhist Sangh were written down in a book called Vinaya Pitaka. Vinaya Pitaka. So from this we know that there were separate branches for men and women. All men could join the Sangh, however children had to take the permission of their parents, and slaves that of their masters. Those who worked for the king had to take his permission, and debtors, means those who have some debt, that of they have to ask from the creditors. So women had to take their husbands' permission. Men and women who joined the Sangh led simple lives. They meditated for most of the time and went to cities and villages to beg for food during fixed hours. That is why they were known as bhikshus. The Prakrit word is beggar. And the bhikshunis, means the female version of the bhikshu and bhikshunis. So they taught other and helped one another. They also held meeting to settle any quarrels that took place within the Sangha. Those who joined the Sangh included the Brahmin, Kshatriyas, merchants and laborers, barbers, courtesans, and slaves. And many of them wrote down the teachings of Buddha. And some of them also composed of beautiful poems describing their life in the Sangh. Monasteries. In order to understand this, to begin with, both Jain and Buddhist monks went from place to place, different places throughout the year, just to enlighten what they know to the people, that means teaching people. So the only time they stayed in one place was during the rainy season, when it was very difficult to travel. Then their supporters built temporary shelters for them in gardens, or they lived in natural caves in hilly areas. As time went on, many supporters of the monks and nuns, and they themselves felt the need for more permanent shelters, and so monasteries were built. These were known as viharas or vihar. If you see, this is a cave hollowed out in the hills. This is a cave in Karle, present-day Maharashtra. Monks and nuns lived and meditated in the shelters like this. So the earliest vihar were made of wood, and then it went to brick. So some were even in caves that were dug out in the hills, especially in western India. So a Buddhist text tells us, just as the waters of rivers lose their names and separateness when they flow into the mighty ocean, so are varna and ranks and family forgotten when the followers of Buddha, they join the order of monks. And very often the land on which the vihar was built was donated by a rich merchant or by a landowner or the king. So the local people come with the gifts of food, clothing, medicines for the monks and nuns. So in return, they give their blessings and they taught the people. So over the centuries, Buddhism spread to many parts of the subcontinent and beyond. Now most of this part, Thailand, China and these areas, they are following Buddhism only. The system of ashrams. So around the time when Jainism and Buddhism were becoming popular, Brahmins developed the system of ashrams. So here the word ashram does not mean a place where people live and meditate, while it is used instead of for a stage of life, ashram. So 4 ashrams were recognized: Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanprastha and then Sannyas. So Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, men were expected to lead simple life and study the Vedas during the early years of their life, that is Brahmacharya. Then they had to marry and live as householders like Grihastha ashram. Then they had to live in the forest and meditate, that is Vanprastha ashram. And finally they had to give up everything and become sannyasis. So the system of ashramas allowed men to spend some part of their lives in meditation also. Generally, women were not allowed to study the Vedas and they had to follow the ashrams, what is being chosen by their husbands. So what was going elsewhere? Iran. Zoroaster was an Iranian prophet. Now his teaching was contained in a book called the Avesta. The language of Avesta and the practice described in it are very similar to those of the Vedas. The basic teaching of the Zoroaster are contained in the maximum: good thoughts, good words and good deeds. So here is a verse which is apart from the Zen Avesta. Lord, grant strength in the rule of truth and good thinking, by means of which one shall create peace and tranquility. For more than 1,000 years, this is an ism, so it is name on Zoroaster. So we call it as Zoroastrianism. This was a major religion in Iran, Later, some Zoroastrians migrated from Iran and settled down in the coastal towns of Gujarat and Maharashtra, and they were the ancestor of today's Parsis.